And Peter Wehner, that's why I want to go to you. I know you've been writing and thinking about the impact on the conservative movement here, this upcoming election, and how, in many ways, Donald Trump more dangerous to American conservatives than Kamala Harris.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, his instincts are more fascistic than they are conservative. And if you go down policies, and Zanny with The Economist went through a lot of them. He's not conservative. He's populist in his views, but I would say mostly in his sensibilities, his dispositions, his call for civic violence, termination of the Constitution, the lawlessness, the nihilism, that whole package is contrary to conservatism, whether it's the conservatism of Edmund Burke or of James Madison or of Lincoln or of Reagan. And so he is not a conservative figure. He's an enemy of conservatism. He doesn't want to conserve anything. He wants to burn things down. One other thing, Jonathan, I want to add to this is because John Heilemann is exactly right. I mean, this is the essence of Trump, but this has always been the essence of Trump. He's sociopathic. The important story, or at least an incredibly important part of this story, is that this appeals to his base. He is pretty finely attuned to what they want to hear. The fact that he is closing this campaign and pitching his closing argument having to do with killing people, and it's more and more deranged, just illustrates what a cult of personality the Republican Party has become. It is almost impossible to think. If you had said in 2016, you had listed 10 things that Donald Trump is saying now or has done now, and said to people at that time, would you support him under that case? First, they would have accused you of Trump derangement syndrome. They'd say he never would have done those things. And if he would have done it, they would have said, well, of course we would break with him. But what's happened? His bond is stronger than it's ever been. So this is a frightening story of what can happen to a generally good and decent nation when a demagogue gets in control and appeals to the darkest instincts of, in this case, a political party, the Republican Party.
Pete, good morning. It's been a long decade for actual conservatives like you and Joe, who believe in crazy things like the Constitution and balanced budgets and personal freedom for women, things like that. So I'm curious what your message is, or even in your private conversations when you talk to your conservative Republican friends who become Trumpists really at the end of the day, because I talk to them all the time. We have conversations, we have dinners, and as you say, they're so quick to dismiss all of this. He's not going to put 200% tariffs on people. He's not going to round up his enemies. He's not going to have General Milley thrown in jail or even killed. That's just Trump being Trump. They're so willing to look the other way. What is your message there to some of those people who may still be persuadable, independents who think that way and are still considering their vote with a few days left here?
Yeah, and it's a good question, Willie. I'd say there are several elements to it. One is that actually Kamala Harris is not the wild-eyed radical that she's portrayed or that she was even in 2019. She's actually going to govern, by, in all likelihood, center-left. Beyond that, it's not just speculation in what Donald Trump might do or say. It's what he has done or what he has tried. I mean, Joe went through and I think made a powerful case, which is he's already done things or attempted to do things in the first term that should have disqualified him. And the last thing is when a person who is fascistic uses fascist language, you got to take them seriously.
Yes.
You know, Pete, for 9 years, for 10 years, I've been trying to talk to conservatives. I know you've been trying to talk to conservatives, people that you and I spent our life, most of our adult life, working with to do dramatic things like balancing the budget, pushing back on Russian aggression. You know, I could go down the list, but can we just really quickly, just for those that are listening right now, and as Jesus would say, for those who have ears to hear, hear. He is the antithesis. If you want to go back to the Old Testament, I mean the New Testament, the Gospels of Jesus Christ, Donald Trump personally is the antithesis of every beatitude. Everything you would read in the Sermon on the Mount. If you want to talk politics instead of theology, he's the antithesis of Edmund Burke, who said radicals can tear down institutions in one day that were built up over centuries by compromise, by consistent, by compromise, by custom, by convention, by prudence. You have Russell Kirk in the conservative mind in the introduction saying, we have to look at the world. We have to make our decisions not based on rabid ideology or, as you said, a personality cult, but we have to decide as conservatives, do we attach ourselves to the party of permanence or do we attach ourselves to the party of progress? That choice does not depend on ideology. It depends on what is in front of us right now. And then you could look through the speeches of Ronald Reagan, the writings of Charles Krauthammer, everything they have said, everything conservatives have said or written since Burke's reflections on the revolution in France have all pointed in the opposite direction of Donald Trump. And yet, here the Republican Party is, Pete. Why and how does this fever break?
Yeah, no, that's an elegant case that you've made, and I completely agree with it, Joe. I mean, I think ultimately it breaks by several things happening. The first is Donald Trump has to lose. Now, if he loses in this election, it's still going to take time. There are so many mini-Trumps, and the disposition sentiments of the Republican Party have been warped. It's no longer a conservative party. So that's the first thing that has to happen. The second thing is that you have to have leaders rise up who were able to make the case that you did, new figures, and to update the message in a way that resonates with people. And third is just, there are times in life one just has to be faithful and to make the arguments, and you need circumstances to change, moments to change. You can make an argument at one time in life, in the life of a country, in the life of a relationship, where your arguments don't gain traction, but something else happens. External circumstances, moods change, attitudes change, and all of a sudden those things begin to have traction. So some of it is just being prepared, faithfully making the argument, as best we can, and hoping that an age of reason replaces this age of irrationality. It's the moment in which we're in, and we've got to do it. And the last thing I'll say is, it just takes in this election to chip away at a few. You're not going to win over the entirety of the Republican Party. You just have to win over enough to get her over the finish line, and that's the first task that we face.
Contributing writer for The Atlantic, Pete Wehner, thank you very much for coming on the show this morning. We appreciate it. Thanks.